Nothing for us without us. With good reason, we often hear this phrase from patient organizations and their communities. Rare patient organizations and the families they support are the experts. Their knowledge and experiences are the foundation for much important work. Listening to rare disease families is an important first step to understanding their journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Raring to Listen. My name is Patty Fritz, and I'm the head of UCB's U.S. Corporate Affairs. To honor and support families living with rare diseases, I am very proud to be kicking off this podcast series that aims to elevate the voice of the rare community. Families who are managing rare diseases like myasthenia gravis and rare epilepsies have unique challenges that only families who live with these diseases can truly understand. While we will never know what it's like to walk in their shoes, we want to make every effort to listen, learn, grow, and work with their communities to contribute in a meaningful way. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this journey. Now, to get us started, it's my pleasure to turn the podcast over to our guest moderator for today's episode of Raring to Listen.
This is Michelle Manzo, Senior Neurology Outcomes Liaison in U.S. Medical Affairs, and you're listening to the UCB Rare Epilepsy podcast series, Raring to Listen. I'll be your host today as we talk with Jennifer Griffin and Michelle Torres about the many roles that caregivers undertake to care for their loved one with rare epilepsies, such as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome or LGS. With the complexities that having LGS presents and the impact on families living with these types of rare epilepsies, how do we, or maybe should we say, is it even possible, to find time for caregivers to practice self-care? We hear that caregivers often have feelings of guilt when it comes to self-care. They may feel selfish even thinking about it. November 1st, we kick off Epilepsy Awareness Month with LGS Awareness Day. This year marks the LGS Foundation's 15th anniversary of serving the LGS community and raising awareness. Each November, they organize international social media campaigns, events, and fundraisers to raise awareness and funds to support the LGS Foundation's mission to improve the lives of individuals impacted by LGS through advancing research, awareness, education, and family support. And it's family support that we want to focus on today. At UCB, we believe that family support starts with finding your community. And so we are super excited to dive into this topic with our amazing guest speakers. Let me first introduce Jennifer Griffin, Director of Family Support Services for the LGS Foundation. After graduating from the ARC of California's Partners in Policymaking program, she developed a strong love for people in the disabled community. This led her to a decade of working in the family support arena, supporting, educating, and advocating for families in the school system and at all levels of government. And this has taken her to a recent post as Director of Family Support Services for the LGS Foundation. Jen is also mom to son Theo, now 21, who has Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and to Theo's two siblings, Grace and Christina. Jen, welcome to Raring to Listen. We're so delighted to have you here and appreciate your taking time to spend with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you again, and there's so much I'd like to dive into today. Can you please share with us how the complexity of caring for an individual with LGS requires caregivers to take on different roles, and what are those roles, and what does each require?
Well, I think the list of roles that a caregiver takes on is constantly evolving and changing. I mean, we are everything from teacher, doctor, nurse, administrative assistant. I wear many, many hats in my role as mom to Theo. And of course, it's always changing because it's really based on his needs. And of course, a lot of the time, what we're doing is a lot of administrative stuff like, making doctor's appointments and dealing with insurance companies and pharmacies and making sure our medications are renewed on time. That is part of the headache and hassle part of it all. We all wished we had personal assistants of our own. But then we're also parents to other kids and making sure that we are, soccer mom and chauffeur and all of those other roles that most parents can say they deal with on a regular basis, but we have to do all the other stuff in addition to that.
Yes, thank you. It sounds as if it's complex and dynamic, both reactive and proactive, and a large element of the known for you on a daily basis. And this is a great time to introduce our other guest, Michelle Torres. Michelle is a pediatric hospital chaplain at Boston Children's Hospital, where she's worked for 14 years. She shares a deep passion for her work as she is accompanying children and their families who are battling similar challenges with illness and or trauma. Michelle and her spouse, Emily, have been together for 23 years, and they are mama and mommy to Mateo, 16 years old, and Johnny, 12 years old. Mateo was diagnosed with infantile spasms at 5 months of age, and she learned that Mateo later met the criteria for LGS in 2021. Michelle, welcome to Raring to Listen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for making time for us today. And we just heard from Jen on all the different roles that caregivers undertake. How does that impact your daily life and your ability to provide for your own self-care?
I often, say to myself, do I have to be this person's frontal lobe too? In terms of all the things that we have to kind of second guess and anticipate and double check because, we are the experts on our kids. And even some of the things that sometimes we think should be obvious aren't. All the advocacy and keeping track of medications and supplies, but also being able to have time to do fun things, right, with our kids. This weekend was kind of a perfect example. I ended up testing positive for COVID on Friday. And poor Emily, we didn't have a nurse on Saturday. We already knew that. And then we were supposed to have a new nurse come train on Sunday. But of course, when she learned that I was positive, she was like, no, thank you. And so Emily was taking care of Mateo, trying to keep Johnny entertained and trying to keep some semblance of sanity in the house. And Mateo has a service dog and bringing me room service. And then thank God we had a nurse last night. Thank God for our nurses.
Thank you. It sounds very difficult to even identify or to recognize the need for self-care, much less planning for it and executing upon it. I hope you're feeling better today.
I got more rest than I can ever remember.
That's the silver lining.
I kind of recommend it,
Thanks to you both for sharing your personal journeys and the complexities of the role of caregiver to your children with LGS. Is there any hope for caregivers listening to the podcast to somehow carve out time for their own much-needed self-care? And what suggestions would you have to share with our listeners?
First of all, we have to define what self-care looks like. Because I think that term has become a very confusing one in our community, and it's a very triggering one as well. So if you said to somebody, you have to take care of yourself, they might bite your head off and say, oh, sure, when am I going to do that? And instead, I think that it would be nice to say, what would self-care look like for you? And what can you actually really do? And it could be just going for a walk. It could be having a glass of wine at the end of the day. It could be watching or binge watching a favorite television show. It could be praying. It could be talking on the phone with a good friend or reading a book or listening to a podcast like this one. It could be something that maybe they can actually find themselves doing. When you talk about self-care, I think too many people think too big. And they think, oh, sure, I'd love to go get a massage, but when's that going to happen? Well, it may not be something that can happen very easily So let's break it down to the things that you can actually include, those 5 and 10 minute or 20-minute occurrences that can happen most days. Because then you can acknowledge when you're doing it, you can actually say to yourself, look at me, I'm taking care of myself right now. And it's important to acknowledge the fact that just because our lives are so overwhelmed with all of the titles that we talked about at the beginning, you can look past all of that and find maybe a few minutes here and there where you can just remind yourself that you are a book lover or a deeply spiritual person who wants to just meditate, or somebody who loves chocolate chip cookies and baking is a real therapeutic thing for you, and eating those cookies as well, of course, is very therapeutic. And you actually got to do that today.
Thank you, Jen, for your poignant reflection and definition and reframing of self-care. I think that it's really excellent advice to think about how to make that manageable. And do you rely on your community of fellow caregivers and care partners to help remind you about the importance of self-care?
Absolutely. I think that the LGS community in particular is a very, very tight-knit community. And just recently, we had a conference, a research conference, and a lot of our caregivers were gathered and offered up a lot of insight into their daily lives, and mainly focusing on a lot of the struggles like, sleep deprivation or behavioral challenges with our loved ones. But afterwards, when we were talking with one another and even talking just individually, the gratitude that so many of our caregivers feel for their sister caregivers or brother caregivers, and the gratitude that they feel for finding their community is really something that we hear again and again and again and again. And I know that that's how I felt the first time I met another LGS caregiver. I felt like I had found a family member, a long-lost family member. And my life changed when I met this community, because you feel so lonely most of the time. And when you find your community, you're a lot less alone.
Thank you for sharing a bit about your journey. I'm glad that you found your community. And Michelle, would you care to elaborate? Share your experience.
Sure. I agree with Jen that I think that particularly when our kids are younger, it is so hard to find downtime. And so that I think it can truly feel impossible. And obviously what's going to feel replenishing to each person is very individual, right? And so one of the things I often say as a chaplain is that none of us can run on empty. So whatever it is that kind of helps us refill our tanks, both spiritually, emotionally, physically, that for me is self-care. And the good news, I hope, for many of us, and has been in our case, is that as Mateo has gotten older, and he's now 16, it is easier to schedule self-care. Emily and I are both master swimmers, which is a coached workout for anyone who's ever swam on a team. We love swimming. It's incredibly relaxing. And we actually got up at 4:30 in the morning during COVID so that we could keep swimming. I also have been an on and off runner and am running again. And I have to say, I've never felt happier. And in terms that I can remember anyway, right? The endorphins you get from running really is re-energizing. And that really inspired me. I'm doing an LGS fundraiser where I'm going to be pushing Mateo in a 10K road race that I'm really excited about. So it was a great way to combine some self-care in terms of the training with, doing something that is going to benefit Mateo and our family and other families like ours. The other thing that I'm a big promoter of is sleep. Let's just say that people very close to me have really struggled with sleep. There are many, many resources, and there are professionals out there who have expertise, and we've had some experience with that, and it really does make a difference. So I'm a huge advocate of sleep because we all just function better when we as caregivers can get sleep. And then the other thing I would just echo is about how we make meaning, and certainly finding community. Certainly LGS for me as well is one of those communities, but any kind of spiritual or religious community that helps us, again, feel connected to others, feel connected to a power greater than ourselves. It gives us a sense of hope. How we find hope, strength, and courage is, I think, an important part of our self-care.
I think another thing is that we witness our kids really struggling and suffering on a daily basis. And I think there is something within all of us where we feel maybe a little guilty about taking any time to experience some personal joy because we know that they are struggling. And I think that sometimes, we feel that we're better parents if we're just always sacrificing, and that means sacrificing our own joy and happiness and self-care as well. And that's why I like to talk about thinking a little small when it comes to self-care, because I don't think anybody will begrudge themselves a moment of baking a cake or sitting down and meditating or watching a comedy on TV and maybe actually laughing. I don't think that we should punish ourselves for that kind of stuff. So the guilt is a big thing. It's a really big thing. I'm sure that there are parents out there who say, oh, somebody invited me out to dinner and I could get somebody to care for my child, or if I have a partner, the partner can care for them while I go out and have a fun dinner. But do I really deserve it when my child is having all of these seizures every day? And, the answer is yes, you do. But I don't know if we have that conversation enough with one another. If we are such a strong community together and we are supporting one another and we are shoulders to cry on for one another, then we should also be lifting one another up and giving one another permission to find some happiness and joy in their lives when they won't do it for themselves. And that means sharing our own experiences. If I went to a movie last night with a girlfriend, I should make sure that I tell everybody, hey, I went to a movie, just so that they know, they can go to a movie too.
Yeah, I also would like to add to that. I've found that when I do take time for self-care, that not only do I have more patience as a parent, I have a better sense of humor. And just in terms of my relationship with my spouse, I can be a lot more generous. On weekends, we often don't have nursing coverage. And one of the things that we're very intentional about is before we start that shift, sitting down together and making a schedule in terms of when each of us will take a break. And thankfully, there are two of us. I'm very aware that that's not always the case. But when there are two of you, being able to plan that. And so we plan when each of us will have some time for self-care. And it makes all of the difference that after that 12-hour shift, while we're still going to be exhausted, we still like each other at the end of the day. And the whole family benefits from it as well.
Thank you both for that encouragement as well as practical guidance on self-care. And I can imagine that you speak about the guilt, that it's not just about taking care of yourselves, but then you both have other children and wondering how do you split that self-care for yourself versus time with them. I'm sure time feels like such a limited resource.
Thank you for mentioning the other children, because we don't mention that sometimes when we're having this conversation. And self-care can also be taking care of them. And if that means having a respite worker or somebody come and watch the loved one who has LGS while you go to a school play or a performance or a sporting event for the other one, that's really, really important to celebrate with that other person. You're also a role model to that sibling. I don't think I want my kids to look back on their lives and say, oh, my mother was such a martyr. She suffered for everyone. And I want them to say, my mother had some balance in her life, and she was able to take care of my brother and take care of herself and give us the love and attention we needed too.
And I know that siblings also have self-care needs that are directly related to seizures or other kind of crises that happen to our children with LGS. And I know in my family, we have an understanding that just one of us needs to check in with Mateo when he's having a seizure, as opposed to both of us running. You know, what typically happens is you drop everything and we both go running, right? And so we have this understanding that one of us needs to stay with Johnny, and then the other one can attend to Mateo, and also just being really specific about checking in with him, like after a seizure, after a hospitalization, or and obviously not waiting till you come home, but you know, the minute there's an admission. For example, if Mateo gets admitted when he's at school, I try to reach Johnny before he gets home so he's not surprised. But I think that's also part of self-care, right? For the sibling, for the family. And again, being really intentional about what are each member of the family's needs, particularly in a situation that's focused on the medical needs and medical crises when they happen.
Thank you, Michelle and Jen. It sounds like you've both done a remarkable job in finding community, movement, health, sleep, and purpose and hope. And I know that it's an ongoing practice in all of those domains for you. And thank you for sharing your approach to all of those in our time together. We know that families living with LGS and other rare epilepsies have a very complex journey that impacts the entire family, and that's why connecting with patient organizations like the LGS Foundation is so important. As we learned today, the extremes in their day-to-day lives as a caregiver for someone with a rare epilepsy can and will wear you down. It's important to remember to take care of yourself. You need to focus on eating well, moving your body, and taking time for the things that bring you joy. Caregivers typically don't just get to turn off, so it's important to realize when you're overwhelmed and to establish coping mechanisms and a plan. Whatever you need to do, prioritize yourself and make it happen. Try to let go of the idea that good caregivers don't need breaks. It is regular breaks that will keep you from breaking. We're so grateful to you, Jen and Michelle, for taking the time to join us today and for sharing your personal experiences to help others in the rare epilepsy community. We sincerely appreciate all you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam Hammond, Ad Interim Head of Ecosystems Rare Syndromes. UCB cares about this topic because we recognize that caring for a loved one with a rare epilepsy impacts everyone in the family. Rare epilepsy caregivers play many different complex roles. They need our help, and they need the help and support of organizations like the LGS Foundation, which provides a critical lifeline to families. Self-care is not selfish, but learning how to carve out time can be difficult. And that's why finding your people, connecting to parents, caregivers, brothers, sisters, and others in the community who share your journey is so important. The people in your community are the ones who truly understand what you need to navigate this complex journey. We are raring to listen to you, to your stories, and want you to know we hear you.
This podcast has been brought to you by UCB, a global biopharmaceutical company committed to discovering and developing innovative medicines that transform the lives of people living with severe disease. For more information, please visit us at ucb.com.